I love when the Speed Secrets podcast is like a friendly conversation at the track. And that's what this episode is, because I'm talking with a good friend, Christian Maloof. Our topic? Driving momentum cars. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today I'm talking with a good friend, Christian Maloof, and this is going to be fun. So, hey, thanks for joining the podcast, Christian.
Well, thank you, Ross. I'm looking forward to it.
And, we touched on this before we got into this, and so this is not going to come as a big surprise to you, but today we're going to talk about driving momentum cars. And I guess before we jump into that, to give listeners some background, you're the chief instructor for the Rally Sport region of the PCA, right?
That is correct.
That means you own and drive a Porsche at times, right?
Yes. I started my driving. A friend of mine said, "Hey, did you know that you can actually take your personal street car to the racetrack and go out with this car club and they teach you how to drive on a real racetrack?" I actually started with a Mustang Cobra, then drove an Audi TT, and eventually a full 993 3.8 race car, which is why I still to this day am the chief driving instructor for that Porsche Club region. That is correct.
Well, that is, typically not considered a momentum car. And yet you also race a Spec Miata, which certainly is a momentum car.
It is. And what's funny to think about is back to the time when I had some good friends that also raced what would be considered more of the higher horsepower, whether it be a German spec or American Iron spec type car. They kept saying, "Oh, it's going to be such a steep learning curve going into a momentum car." As you know, I have no shortage of ego, so of course I didn't think that that would require too much time. I figured at least a session or two, and that should do it. But truth be told, there are significant differences, but differences that I think helped me become a much better driver overall. So when I get back into various other cars, whether it be a high downforce car like a Prototype 1 car, or into one of the Cayman Inter Series cars or spec Porsches that I've raced, I definitely take some of those lessons learned and attribute it, or I should say apply that to other cars, and it has given me some good deal of success in those cars as well.
Well, and it's funny, I guess, I don't know, when was that the first time that I came to one of your club events? Had to be like 5 or 6 years ago, it seems like, or?
That is correct. That is correct.
And that was it was at Grattan, and I remember coming there. It was a Porsche, PCA event, and I don't know. It seemed like you guys had 120, 140 cars there or something like that, and 110 and 100 or 130 of them were Porsches. And then the next year there was maybe slightly less Porsches, and maybe there was a few more Miatas. And then it seems like over the last few years, I don't want to take anything away from the Porsches because they're still the coolest and everything, but there seems to be like 40 Miatas showing up at these events now. What's going on?
Well, so it's funny that you ask me that, because for many years I fought the idea of getting into a Spec Miata specifically, because it doesn't have the panache. It doesn't make this ridiculously awesome sound, and it doesn't have a really cool painted hood crest, and it doesn't have giant wings, and it doesn't cost several thousands of dollars for one set of tires. So it just seemed like it wouldn't have the same draw until you drive one for the first time. And what's fun about a Miata, and a Spec Miata in particular, a very capable driver can typically get into one and drive it 7.5, 8/10 right out of the box and be, let's say relatively quick, but typically enjoying themselves to a level that is not always attainable in other cars. If you're going to go and take your GT3, whether it's a 996 or a current 991 version, you're going to be going pretty fast if you're trying to get 10/10 out of it. In a Miata, you have really nothing to help you other than your own skill to hustle that car as quickly as possible, and as skillfully as possible, because there are some Spec Miata drivers that can go very quickly and maybe don't have as much skill, but the top of the top, those drivers are bringing everything to the table. So I think that the drivers that are looking for a greater challenge find that, hey, I can I can get one of these for a fraction of they typically keep their Porsches, but a fraction of the cost of some of these other cars, and go out there and actually become a better driver and really enjoy themselves at the same time.
So I guess before we go any further, let's talk about what is a momentum car. And I'd love to hear, what is your definition of a momentum car? And then I'll tell you what I think it is.
Well, so you and I, we spoke about this briefly earlier, and I know that when you and I are working together, or you and I are working with others, we can take that adage and say, well, a lot of these cars are momentum cars. What I think for me, and like we've driven so many different platforms, so many different power levels and downforce and grip and mechanical grip, different types of grip. For me, a momentum car is one that I don't need to, let's say you're at Mid-Ohio and you're going under the Honda Bridge. You don't need to let the car out in a Miata, in a momentum car, like you do in a heavier, much higher horsepower car. At Waterford Raceway, before going into Big Bend, if you're in a really fast car coming down Hilltop, you have to release the wheel to let the car out. It's got too much power and too much weight that you're dealing with. So for me, it isn't necessarily a number, but it's a whole package of what you're given. And something like this doesn't have that tremendous amount of weight and power that you're dealing with, kind of like a pendulum. Even in a 911 GT3 Cup car, you have this pendulum you have to do that swing with. And a momentum car, it's not going to be going that fast, and of course you always want to retain as much speed as possible because you never get it back. But very much so in a Miata, you and I often are working on braking in particular, and whatever you lose, you will lose it forever. So you really have to be very careful with it, and very careful with when you go back to power, of course, because you have to kind of get that squirrel cage to spool up and coerce it to try to go faster.
And that's, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because, not only are you fast in a Spec Miata and whatever else you drive, but you've also done a lot of coaching and instructing drivers. So your perspective is interesting in that, just thinking about it in terms of letting the car run out and unwind and stuff like that. That's not something I guess I've really kind of thought about that much, but you make a good point. One of the ways I think a lot of people think of, well, there are momentum cars, which you don't want to slow down. And then there are point and shoot cars that have lots of horsepower that you can slow it down and reaccelerate it. Well, we could have a long conversation about how even a car with lots of horsepower, if you slow it down, you still have to reaccelerate it. So if you slow it down less, you're going to be faster. But I think, maybe one way of defining a momentum car is it's a car that if you make a mistake, you can't just regain it by pushing a little harder on the gas pedal. and I think that's kind of what you were touching on, is just, it's in a lot of ways, they're less forgiving.
Yes. So something that will probably amuse you. I do recall once I rented a Spec Miata a couple of times, and I try to maintain my fitness every day. And I do remember my right foot getting a little tired because I was literally mashing it through the firewall, thinking there's got to be more to this. And if I just keep pushing harder, there'll be something else that will come in. And literally what it was is, when I was learning how to get to that 9.5, 9.9, 9 to the nth degree tenths, um, you've done something wrong when you are too binary. So on a momentum car, you definitely want to roll as much speed as you can. You want to make minimal speed corrections, even if it's a breathe of the throttle versus using the actual brake. That of course is a speed correction as well. You want to minimize and just stabilize the platform as much as possible to keep that speed. And typically our cornering speeds, we get a shock upgrade very soon now, but we've historically had a very poor shock on purpose and all the same. So you've got even one more challenge of, there's someone I think as well too, a fellow teacher out there who uses the analogy that a car needs to be told what it's going to do, much like a naval ship. And so you call out through the ranks and files of, hey, we're gonna be turning, we're gonna be turning, we're gonna be turning. And in a Spec Miata, you do have to let the suspension set before you actually institute a steering input to really get the car to turn in. So not only is a momentum car a challenge, but also each specific platform brings its own challenge as well. You can't just move your hands too fast because you will exceed the ability of the mechanical grip. And much like if you're, say, in a go-kart and you're just sliding it every which way, that too is not fast.
You mentioned the, letting the suspension take a set kind of thing. And I actually just recently had somebody send me an email asking me that question of what does it mean by let the car take a set? And, I'm picking on you here. What's your definition of that?
Well, because you know me pretty well, unfortunately, you and I are not standing across from each other because I'd like to gesticulate and move my hips and move my butt a little bit and this kind of thing. And I'd say, it's when this happens. And it is, to me, it's something that I have trained my body and try to train others to be extremely aware of. It is something that is very noticeable. And it is when that feeling transfers from the sort of uneasy state to a steady state. Once you and I always talk about slow hands. The slow hands get that set and you feel it. You can actually feel the car begin to push back. Hopefully you're in a really good seat. You can feel that seat pushing back into you. And that's when that car is taking a set. And it doesn't, the time it takes varies. Of course, it also varies with track surface and topography as well. But that set is something you feel immediately. And that's when you can really get the car in. Now, having said this, you and I, it's easy for us to say this because we know it, but those inputs are linear. That doesn't mean to say you turn a little bit, okay, now it sets and now you turn more. Because, of course, then you're instituting more, you're asking the car more than one thing. So it's still a smooth single input. You're just letting the car, you're giving the car time. So, again, going back to a P1 car, for example, you're in a little prototype car, that time is extremely different.
Yeah. So it's, you turn in, there's some weight transfer, load transfer. The car starts to lean a little bit. You're transferring all the weight over. And there's a point where that load transfer, that weight transfer has sort of, it's finished. It's done
Correct.
as much as it's going to do. It's kind of, the car is set. And some corners, the corners are so short that by the time you get the car set, you're already starting to unwind. So you're unloading that. So the car almost in some corners almost doesn't take a set because it's sort of in and out so fast. Whereas a longer corner, you can kind of the carousel at Road America, you kind of get in there, the car takes a big set and you kind of wait. And the car, now there's some variations in the surface, the elevation, the camber and the track and stuff like that has an impact on it. But mostly the car is taking a set. And once it's taken that set, it's like, I know what I've got here.
Absolutely. Yeah, when that weight transfer has happened to the point where so I guess that's how I was describing it, that seat is sort of pushing back, or the car is communicating to you that, hey, I am set. I mean, I look forward to that, much like, you and I were recently talking about driving or racing in the rain. The success I've had in the rain was when I was able to be excited and comfortable and in control and asking the car to do what it is was doing rather than going for a ride. I'm not, oh, so tentative. Oh, the car's going to slide. The car's going to, I'd say, okay, this surface is going to change. This is where it's going to loosen. And right about now, the car is going to grab so much. It's going to, it's going to jerk my head. That's how much grip I'm going to have. And much like that in the dry, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Boom, it's happening. There it is. Yes. And it's a good thing to have those mini rewards as you're driving and look forward to those. And be hungry for those. I want more. I want more. So again, you and I always joking about knowing there's always more. I typically my own biggest flaw is I tend to roll too much speed. I try to hero as much minimum speed as possible that I go a little bit too far. But what that actually helps me with is when I return to that same track or that same corner, if I'm racing, I go into those corners with the utmost confidence because I know where I can put the car and how fast I can be in the corner in different situations. If I'm slightly inside or slightly outside, or I'm side by side or three wide, having the experience of going into that corner very fast and saying, okay, well, I know how to kind of deal with it and when I can get back to power and what I need to do with it. It just gives me more. It's like more swings at the driving range, so to speak.
I'm sitting here, I'm smiling, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing. As I was talking about the car taking a set, fortunately I'm sitting in a chair that's a swivel chair because the car has kind of got a little, motion in it here, my seat, and I'm turning my hands just like you are as well, I'm sure. And, so, just hearing you talk about what you're talking about, it's, you can't help but smile, kind of go, yeah. And you talk about the overdriving the car a little bit on the entry. And I always say that you can't drive a car consistently at the limit unless you can overdrive the car. And you have to have that ability to overdrive it a little bit and then just kind of dial it back that tiny, tiny little bit. And, that was the big serious aha moment for me driving in the rain, was when I would come into a corner rather than like a lot of drivers, especially in the rain, come in and go, okay, when's the car going to start to slide? When's it going to slide? When's it going to slide? Oh, there it goes. And then you react at the last second. And instead, if you go in going, I'm going to make the car slide from the moment I enter the corner by overdriving it a little bit on the entry. And then you just kind of dial it back and you go, okay, I know what I've got. I think that's critical to be able to drive a car fast.
Very much so. When I raced the Porsche, I would say, let's say more full time. I had two things that made it more difficult to actually transition into a Spec Miata in the rain. The first was I had this giant lump in the back. So when I would race against BMWs, I'd have this huge advantage going to power in the rain because I'd have the weight over the rear wheels. So I could get to power much, much quicker. And of course I had a specific rain tire. When I first got into a Spec Miata, obviously there's no weight over the rear wheels. And we had to run a tire that was just essentially treaded. It was not a rain specific tire. And so I, sort of trial by fire, I flat spotted a lot of tires in the wet. I wasn't flat spotting tires in the dry, but I was approaching it, tentatively, like, oh, I don't know where I have grip. I don't have grip, instead of actually what you and I are now talking about. And part of that was getting a few races, and I'll be honest, maybe more than a few under my belt before I could really kind of unleash that. The secret of driving a momentum car, at least in my opinion, that last little bit, you can, I feel like I can get into a particular car and go 8/10 and be extremely competitive. If you do that in especially the series we're running in, you'll be 32nd. I mean, you can't go out and just drive well. I mean, you absolutely have to get every last bit, every lap. And for those that enjoy it, I mean, if winning and being at the front is what you want, that's what has been so rewarding specifically about Spec Miata.
Just a quick break to thank Simpson Race Products for helping support this podcast, and more importantly, for helping us all stay safer. There aren't any companies that I can think of that have done more for safety in our sport, from pro-level racing to the casual track day driver and everyone in between, than Simpson. I've mentioned the Hybrid S head and neck restraint in past episodes because it's one that works with a standard 3-point seatbelt. Many drivers and instructors don't know that all other devices, including the Hans device, only work with 4 or more point harnesses. So if you're driving or instructing in a car with a standard 3-point seatbelt, you need the Simpson Hybrid S. Now you can learn more by going to teamsimpson.com. Okay, back to my conversation with Christian. And that, that's a really good point, because not everybody wants to, go racing wheel to wheel. They want to just do lapping track days or whatever. Some people, even if they are racing, it's not, it's more the social part of it than the going fast. But I think there's something about the, I don't care who you are, the constant chasing of, can I do that just a little better? Could I brake a little bit later? Can I release the pedal a little different here? Can I can I be a little smoother? Can I get the throttle sooner? Can I carry half a mile an hour more through there? Can I shave 1/10 of a second off my lap time? There's something just super rewarding about that. And so let me go back to the whole momentum thing. If you're sitting there and you've got a Porsche, you name whatever model you want, and a Spec Miata sitting there, and you're getting out of the Porsche and you're getting into the Miata, is there something deliberate that you do differently? Do you go, okay, now I'm in this car, I have to deliberately do this? Or do you kind of just drive it and see what happens?
Whether it's a comfort level, a sheer speed thing, the level of attack in a Miata is very different than in a Porsche. That could be, to be honest, it could be level of investment. That could be most Porsches, save for, the all-out race cars. It's a softer setup than the stiffness that we try to get out of the cage and the chassis specifically, since we don't have much suspension. I would say the level of attack in the Miata for me is very different. I attack extremely hard. I would say in any car, I typically try to brake less, sooner but less, and see how the platform responds. I am much more greedy with the throttle, certainly in a Miata, than I am. That took me 1 or 2 times out in a Miata, and someone said, you don't have to squeeze the throttle in a Miata, whereas in other cars you really do. I think that from a momentum standpoint, one thing that I don't equate to karting, for example. Some people say, oh, is it just like driving a go-kart? And I would say no. I have some good friends that are very competitive at go-kart racing, and their inputs are much quicker than what I'm doing in my Miata. I feel that I'm moving very smoothly and slowly. When people watch from the outside, or they're in other cars, they say it looks like the car is just easy to drive and completely on rails. But if you ever see an in-car video, I'm fairly busy. I mean, I'm burning a ton of calories. I'm really just wringing this thing's neck every second. So I would say, whether that's the answer you're looking for or not, in a momentum car, I am absolutely on maximum 100% attack every single second. Yeah.
Okay, so if you are super fast in a Miata and everything I've seen you drive. And by the way, you're super, super fit. But when I've seen you in a Miata, you are just on the ragged edge. If I put you into a IMSA GTD Porsche and I said, go out to qualify for an IMSA race, would you have to step it up to be at that level? Is it because the level of racing that you're competing in? Or is it because when you get into a Porsche, it's not the same. You're not trying to win a Spec Miata race.
So in a GTD Porsche specifically, I would say that for the most part, it would be somewhat similar. However, you're right at the cusp of where I think you and I could have very lengthy conversations about momentum. So I think you picked sort of an interesting car, because I think right at, GT3R Cup car level, that's arguably right at the sort of momentum limit. And we can argue about, no, we're just going to throw it in tight, get the car, really trail brake and rotate the car a lot so that you're pointed straight, and then you can get back to power much sooner, but in a straight line. I mean, that's that cusp where I think there's some argument to be had. From my driving style standpoint, I much prefer rolling big speed, maximum sort of diameter of that, opening it up as much as possible, coming in wide. That's sort of the style that I like. I do think you would attack a GTD car in particular. If you did with the same fervor, I think you would be very competitive. I don't think where you're going with that question means that there's varying levels of talent, because I know you know the answer to that. But I don't think that's what you mean, right?
And maybe what I'm asking is, if you, maybe it's commitment. When you're in a Spec Miata race, your commitment is, I'm going to drive this thing to the ragged edge, and I'm going to, grab it by the scruff of the neck and whatever it takes to get the most out of it. If you were, if I said to you, okay, Christian, you're qualifying a GTD Porsche at Mid-Ohio for the IMSA race, and you qualify well here, you're going to get paid a lot of money to drive race cars for the next 10 years. Your level of commitment would be stronger than if it was just, hey, you're out with some friends and you hop in their Porsche for a club race or something. Is that same level of kind of just on the ragged edge and slightly overdriving it and bringing it back and just dancing on that edge, is it the same?
I think it is the same. So I don't have a current GTD, but my 3.8 911, it's an older, back when they were still handmade. The car that I won a championship in, I absolutely loved putting that thing on the ragged edge. I think you don't have to always do that to be successful. But I loved it when I was in that moment. And I think I'm a much better driver today than I was then. And I think it took me driving a car like the Miata to get to that point. So recently when I went down to Sebring to help someone else drive, all I needed to do was do 8/10 to set the fastest lap of the weekend. But that's not what you're asking. You're saying, okay, this is going to mean something. I think I would take what I've learned in my momentum car, I would apply it to a car that's going to have more mechanical grip. It's going to have more aero. We might do some slightly different things because we actually have a little bit of aero. But I think I would attack it similarly with the skill set that I've learned in a Miata.
And then there's the whole discussion around, is it easier to go from a fast car like your Porsche and then get into a Spec Miata that's slower, where you're kind of like, man, I got all day to drive this thing through the corner, or down the straightaway, and think about my braking points, and is that a whole lot easier than going the other way, where, you're used to wringing the neck of a Miata, but now you're in this car that's got more grip, it's got more horsepower, it's got more brakes, it's got more tire, it's got more aero, it's got more everything, and the thing is just faster. Is that more difficult?
I think if anyone can learn from my path, I think it is, and it's hard to do, if you can start with a momentum car, especially start with something that has no ABS, that has really no no power to speak of, certainly no traction control. It's power boosted steering and power boosted. Well, it's actually a manual rack. I should take that back. But power boosted braking. Basically taking everything out of it so that you are so finely honed on what the car is telling you, so that you have this open line of communication back and forth, so that whatever the platform is, you can get into this other platform, feel very comfortable, and I think be much quicker out of the gate. So the opportunity I got to drive one of these, I think it was a Hayabusa or Suzuki powered 900-pound P1 car with 920 with me in it. Some people said, well, I don't know how you're going to know how to drive an aero car. This thing has 3,000 pounds of downforce and only weighs 900 pounds. And I didn't know what that kind of aero was going to be like. I just looked as far ahead as I could. I was as smooth as I could be and just drove it as quickly as I could. I mean, I basically, the motor was always trying to outrun me. I just shifted as quickly as I could, but focused on all those fundamentals that we were focusing on when we had no power. And I didn't even realize, my min speed in a corner where I typically do very well at 63.5 was 87 in this P1 car. And it was just because I was feeling what the platform was giving me, just like I would in the Miata. Of course, I can't see the speedometer, so it didn't matter. But I absolutely think you want to start with something like a momentum car and let that open the doors for other cars. It is much more difficult to start in a very capable car because it masks so many small errors that unfortunately grow to be very big errors. When I tried my hand at professional racing, one of the things that I started to do, again, something that people can learn from me, is I would take that attack, and that maximum attack would happen on the brakes. People say, well, I'm just going to go out this session and I'm going to go a second faster. Oh, okay. How are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to brake later. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, what are you going to do with that? Well, typically when that happens, then people brake harder. And so, yeah, you can, it's a much longer conversation, but when you're talking about finding speed, if you have a foundation of learning from something like a momentum car, I think you're far better served. Some people have the ability to start with something like a cup car. I just don't. I don't recommend it. Certainly get one that they're phenomenal. Just don't start there.
Yeah. Actually, what you should do is that you should go and buy a cup car, and then you should give it to Christian and I so we can go and break it in for you and make sure it's ready for you when you are ready. In the meantime, go and drive a Miata. Right. How does that sound?
Right. We'll make sure we set lots of reference laps at tracks all around the country.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was interesting. I mean, earlier on, you kind of touched on the, actually braking lighter. And I think that's something where, a lot of times when we've got a car with a lot of horsepower, a lot of torque, we stand the car on its nose, slow it right down, overslow it, turn it, stand on the throttle, rock it out of the corner, and think we're God's gift to driving, when if you actually braked a little lighter and kind of rolled that speed through the corner, you might actually find that you're even quicker down the straightaway. I can't remember if I've told you this story or even whether I've told this story on the podcast before, but I was coaching a group of drivers a few years ago and asked who was driving a momentum car, and two people put up their hands. One was in a 1 Series BMW and one was in a Miata. And one fellow says, no, I'm not in a momentum car. I have a 640 horsepower Corvette. And, throughout the day, as we worked on a bunch of things in terms of brake release and rolling speed and all that kind of stuff, he says, I got to show you my data and video from one lap. And every single lap through this tight corner leading onto the long straightaway, his min speed was 39 miles an hour, 39 miles an hour, 39 miles an hour. And one lap he went through the corner, and he actually, I heard him in the video, like go, yes, like this on the video. And he knew, because he was catching his gear a little sooner, he knew that he was quicker. And when we looked at the data, his min speed was 41 miles an hour. And that added up to a massive, like 11 miles an hour difference in this massively horse-powered Corvette down the end of the straightaway. So to think, okay, I can slow it down, turn it, get on the power, and my min speed isn't that important because I have lots of horsepower, I think that's actually a mistake. And I think thinking about rolling speed, now obviously you can roll too much, but I think sometimes we're so caught up in this in slow, out fast thing that it hurts us.
Well, I have two things to speak to that. So the first, early on, I can remember seeing something from Formula One where very famous drivers, certainly many have repeated it, the statement of, oh, you should only be full throttle or full brake and nothing in between. And so I take these sayings that, are somewhat true, and I was trying to apply them, and I was thinking about, full power, and then, then I want to be able to get to full, full braking and then full power again. And the reality is, if you want to go fast in anything, you really want to learn to drive with 4 tires, not 2. And so the people that are very binary with braking super hard and setting it on its nose and then popping off the brake and then slamming on the throttle, it's something, and I know we all do this. I play with a water bottle, and we look at the way that you're transferring, weight and unsettling your platform. You're absolutely right. Doesn't matter what you're driving. If you're driving with 4 tires, you are going to go faster. So you do that by some of these things we're saying, and more. Something like that Corvette driver, we would want to look at, when can you get to maintenance throttle, and when can you get to, if that Corvette driver is to the point where he can just floor it, then he's probably overslowed, right? I mean, if you can get to the point where you can all of a sudden floor it, you slowed down too much. You went from the limit to, no, we're nowhere near the limit, and now we're trying to get back to the limit of grip. So.
And I've always said, one way to get to full power sooner in a corner, slow the car down to 1 mile an hour at your turning point. Then you can just stand on a throttle right from there. But you're never going to make that back up again. So That's the argument of going too far that direction. Yeah.
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. So without giving away all your secrets, maybe just some of them, what do you think the key to going fast in a Spec Miata is? Or I guess any momentum car? Is there something, I guess, just beyond the obvious of, roll momentum?
So I would say it's a combination of things that we have mentioned already, that you and I have talked about in many conversations. But when I am, regardless of whether I'm working, looking at my own data or working with someone else, for me, that goal is to minimize the imbalance going into a corner. And so the translation of that is to brake as hard as I need to, but less and sooner, so that I can set up that platform and roll the absolute maximum speed I can with vision through the corner, getting to full throttle as soon as I can. So that sounds like a pretty big mouthful, but
yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
It's
one of those things where it's a dance. You really want to dance with the car that you're driving and really embrace that dance. And so what I love is going into any corner and that feeling of that absolute cornering limit. And so I would say to brake sooner but less, and to work on that brake release. So I think a lot of people forget about the release part. So you want to brake sooner but less, working on the release with your vision to full power. That's something that people, their tunnel vision gets worse and worse as they get into apexes. And I find that people are staring down or looking down at the apex, and you just completely throw away I think a lot of people think the fun is getting to power coming out of the corner. And for me, I guess that speed secret is the first part of the corner. It's the fun. It's that, where is that comfort level of the maximum speed you can roll in with getting to power? Now, admittedly, that's also where I sometimes go too fast, too many times, and get back to power later. But for me, that speed secret is to minimize that unsettling the platform. So in other words, you're braking sooner but less. You're rolling out of the brakes so smoothly not to disrupt the platform, and getting back to power from there. So to me, that's really the key. That's the final frontier. I think a lot of people get too caught up in, I got to brake late, and that's where they throw it away.
So I heard minimize unsettling or imbalancing the car. I heard braking maybe slightly earlier. Now, obviously, that's assuming that you're already now pretty much braking at the limit, but maybe even just back that up just a tiny little bit, brake a little earlier, focus on the brake release, roll the right speed through the corner, commit to throttle, and use your vision to make all that stuff happen. That's all. Sounds simple.
Yeah, and this is definitely something that I would consider to be, these are final frontier tips. These are not first day tips. Because it is the assumption that you've already gotten every other part right, because those other parts often either come more quickly or more easily. But I think when you're really going for those last, you've seen it, we're fighting out there for thousandths of a second. When you're really trying to hero out brake, you have a tendency to increase the pressure and oftentimes ruin the corner by carrying too much duration. And then you also see that just recently in a race, kind of a big race for me, I had 4 guys I watched all try to hero out brake each other. So I just let it happen and went through it. All of a sudden I'm in the lead, and then I just checked out because I was like, okay, you guys can all, you're busy trying to hero each other. I'm just going to worry about getting my platform turned in and get back to power. And I just drove away.
So I don't like to use don't, but don't out hero yourself.
That's right.
And the last thing I'm going to kind of touch on here, though, because you've touched on this a lot, is, and it's maybe, it's the Holy Grail on a lot of this stuff, is it's picking the right speed. It's coming into the corner and, you said 63.4 miles an hour. Well, how do you know it's 63.4 and not 62.4 or 63.8? That's the, I think what makes the best drivers in any type of racing, but for sure, if you're driving a Miata, it's not overslowing, but also not underslowing. And, it's having that ability to sense that speed, I think, is absolutely critical. Not something that's learned in day one.
No, and it requires, you and I both use data religiously. And in addition to data out of the car, for me personally, I also have some supplemental indicators, which are good learning tools on a practice day. They can even be seen in my data. So I have some additional RPM lights, and I know, you can pick a corner and I can say, this is how many dots and the color that I know I will see in my peripheral, knowing that I nailed that. And that's usually within 100 RPM or so. And that makes a big difference. And then of course you muscle memory, you repeat it, much like, you want to know what that good feeling is like. Well, that's what it's like. So
I love that. And I think you call them supplemental indicators. And, I call them report cards, right? They're things that you can just, You can check every time you come out of a corner. And I'm kind of almost shocked that I think it's because we have so much data and other devices now. I mean, boy, I don't want to do the, back in my day kind of thing, but back in my day when I was racing a Formula Ford, we had this silly old tack that was a mechanical tack, and that was everything. You came out of a corner and you checked the tack at various points down the straightaway and at various parts, and that was your feedback, and you knew immediately whether that was a good run or a bad run. And I think as we start to rely on predictive timers and a lot of other things, it's one of those kind of forget the basics. So I love that your supplemental indicators. That's a good one. I call them report cards.
Sometimes it's nice to be wordy just to be wordy.
Well, so to wrap this up, Christian, you kind of already said a speed secret of just minimize unsettling the car, but any other great pieces of advice for drivers?
Well, something that I try to remind my great friends and fellow competitors is to have fun. You cannot say it enough. Just remember to have fun. And for some of us, having fun means being very competitive. My great friend Mike, he and I co-drove in an endurance race, and he said, I'm going to go out there and just keep the car clean and make sure I hand it over to you, exactly the way the car is now. And I said, okay, I'm going to go out there and try to destroy every single person out there on the track.
At least you were honest.
So, he put his arm around me and he said, yes, I know that. So just remember to have fun, whatever that means for you, to have fun. And, when you're on a practice day, where you're in a race or in a qualifying session, pick something to have fun, because you need rewards too. It really is. It's easily looked past, and that reward system, hopefully is what keeps you in it.
I love that about the rewards. That's important stuff. So, hey, thanks for doing that. I mean, you and I, we could spend 4 days talking about this stuff, and we will again soon. Hey, how do if people want to kind of follow you and some of the other stuff you're doing on the track, how do they follow you, social media wise?
I think the easiest thing is if people are on Instagram. It's a very easy way to just see little blurbs. My wife and I have an account called The Car Couple, and it's got all kinds of exploits on there. And it's great to chat with people. I'm friends with pros and amateurs all around the world, and it's great fun to support each other and kind of check on each other, see how we're doing. So that's probably a good way.
That's cool. And you guys definitely are the car couple. I love
my wife, Spec Miata, which we have a Cayman that she loves driving, but she absolutely loves her Smurf Blue NA Miata. She calls it Smurfette, and she drives it incredibly well. And I think she would tell you the same, that it has been a huge part of her learning development, and really proud of how she drives it.
Well, give Valerie a hug for me, and please say hi to all the Rally Sport PCA guys, friends that I've got back there. I'm looking forward to hopefully get back there, see you guys again next year at some point.
Will do.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Christian, and I'll tell you, have fun.
I will. Thanks, Ross.
If you like this podcast, you might also like the driving tips and the Ask Ross column I have on my website at speedsecrets.com. In the Ask Ross column, I get this big surprise. I answer questions that people have sent me. So if you have a question, check out that page on my website to see if I've already answered it, or email the question to me and I'll answer it there. Let's keep the momentum up with this week's Speed Secret. Feel the car take a set. As Christian and I talked about, your car will take a set in a corner, but not always. You have to practice feeling whether it does or not to fully develop your skills. Pay attention. Feel for when all of the load or weight transfer that is going to take place has taken place. Sometimes by the time it's nearly fully taken place, you're already unwinding the steering and therefore unloading the car, so it's never spent any time fully in the taken a set mode. But sometimes, especially in longer corners, the car will take a set for quite some time. You can develop your feel for this state if you focus on it, and in doing so, you'll be an even faster driver. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope you come back for more next week. Till then, keep learning and having fun.